There's an element in the Resident Evil universe that changes everything, one that's present, even when we don't always see it, at the root of every monster, every bioweapon, and every catastrophe. It's the starting point of the entire story, in the very core of Resident Evil. And no, it's not the T virus. It's not G or C or even Uroboros. It's something far older, far purer, and far more terrifying. I'm talking about the Progenitor Virus. And if you think I'm exaggerating its importance, think again. Progenitor doesn't just create life. It can rewrite it, it can destroy it, and it can push it in a completely new direction, one impossible to achieve through any known form of human bioengineering. Every horror in the Resident Evil universe exists because of this primeval virus. The Progenitor is an RNA retrovirus. Spherical in shape and surprisingly large by viral standards, its size alone hints at a massive genetic storage capacity. And understanding how it works is key to understanding everything that came after. Unlike conventional viruses, Progenitor doesn't simply infect and destroy cells. When it enters a host organism, it rewrites the genetic code of the host cells at a structural level, forcing them to synthesize entirely new proteins and nucleic acids. In other words, it transforms the cell from the ground up. And here's where it gets truly fascinating. Once inside the body, the virus triggers accelerated evolution. The host tissues mutate, strengthen, and adapt. The body changes to become more resilient and more efficient. And if the environment demands new traits, Progenitor responds, creating new organs, new capabilities, even new instincts. It can even recombine DNA from different species, leading to stable chimeras like the infamous hunters. Umbrella called this phenomenon the DNA mutation factor, and its potential practically limitless. If these mutations could be properly directed in a lab setting, then any imaginable biological outcome could be achieved. Literally anything could be created. Now, most viruses can only infect cells with compatible receptors. That's why, in nature, cross-species infection is rare. But Progenitor breaks that rule. This virus can infect bacteria, fungi, plants, animals, in any form of cell-based life. Not only that, it can invade every system of the body, from muscles to nerves. It's essentially a master key to all terrestrial life, and there's a reason for that. Throughout this video, we will see how Umbrella was obsessed with controlling the effects of the Progenitor virus, manipulating DNA, creating new organisms, pushing science beyond ethical limits, all in the name of power, but never being truly able to control them. And it really makes you wonder, how much control do we have over the tools we created and use every day? I mean, think about it. Have you ever wondered what platforms like ChatGPT or Claude are actually doing with your conversations? Sure, we all know Alexa listens to us and pushes product recommendations. Meta retargets us based on everything we click. But AI platforms? We give them our thoughts, dreams, sensitive questions, even business ideas, all under the assumption that it's just between us and the machine. But it's not. What you share often gets tied to your identity, and in many cases, sold off to third parties, or even handed to governments. In fact, ChatGPT currently has the former director of the NSA on its board. It took us way too long to realize what social media companies were doing with our data in the last decade. Are we about to make the same mistake with AI? Honestly, this kind of thing makes me uncomfortable. But let's face it, AI is also incredibly useful. That's why I started using Venice AI, which is also sponsoring today's video. Venice is a generative AI platform built with privacy in mind. It's completely private and permissionless. No identity tracking, no hidden censorship, and absolutely no data harvesting. For example, try asking other AIs to generate an image of soldiers fighting in Ukraine or something as simple as a King Charles Spaniel. You might get blocked or denied. But with Venice.ai, you're in control. No restrictions, no judgment. I personally love their proclam, especially for these features. Uploading PDFs and getting summaries. Turning off safe mode for full creative freedom. Modifying the system prompt itself to fine-tune how the AI responds. High limits on text and images, so you're not constantly capped. Venice runs directly in your browser. No installs, no downloads, and your entire chat history is stored only locally on your device. Use my custom link, venice.ai/Pulsa start, And don't forget to apply the code PULSA for 20% off the Pro plan. If you're someone who values privacy but still wants powerful, uncensored AI, this is the best option I've found. Thank you, and let's go back to today's video. Many people assume Progenitor was created by Umbrella, but that's not the case. The Progenitor Virus is a living fossil, a relic from a time when life itself was just beginning to emerge. Long before animals or even plants existed, this virus was already here, interacting with primitive microbes, forcing mutations that eventually led to the first complex cells. But as life evolved and became more complex, it also grew more vulnerable to extreme mutations. What was once a tool for evolution became a threat. The mutations triggered by the Progenitor Virus began to destroy cells instead of enhancing them, leading to necrosis. Those organisms that did survive infection were left in altered states, either severely weakened or transformed into hyper-aggressive predators with unregulated metabolisms. The most obvious example of this is the zombie. Yes, the very same kind we usually associate with the T-virus. But in reality, this condition was already a common manifestation of progenitor infection. Over time, even those outcomes became rare, and in most cases, the virus caused near-instant death in its host. By the time the virus was rediscovered by modern humanity, there were very few traces of its existence left. Only one known strain had survived extinction, the one found in the stairway to the sunflower, deep within a hidden cavern in West Africa. This flower that contained the Progenitor Virus was no ordinary plant. It possessed extraordinary endurance and was capable of growing in extreme conditions, even underground, completely cut off from sunlight. But perhaps the most surprising detail is that even versions of this flower that no longer contained the virus still displayed enhanced vitality, as though Progenitor had permanently altered its genetic makeup. This particular strain of Progenitor was isolated in its purest form, and it was discovered that some humans, those with a specific genetic makeup, could actually survive the infection process. These individuals didn't just resist death, they achieved something extraordinary. They suppressed the virus's aggressiveness, controlled its mutations, and obtained only its benefits. This phenomenon was known as adaptation, and the few who achieved it were called progenitor humans. But these humans were more than just survivors. They achieved a state of biological immortality. They stopped aging and gained strength, speed, reflexes, endurance, healing capabilities, and intelligence far beyond ordinary limits. Some even speculated that they might develop psychic abilities, such as telepathy or pyrokinesis. Their appearance remained almost entirely human, with one key exception: a mutation in their eyes. Their eyes would turn red with a reptilian quality and glow with bioluminescence when experiencing intense emotion. If Wesker just came to mind, that's because he's an incomplete example of one of these beings. Over time, the Indipaya people discovered this flower in its purest form. To them, it wasn't just a plant, it was sacred. It was tied to their sun god and formed a central part of their rituals. Consuming the flower was seen as a divine act, a trial of life or death. Those who survived the ritual became progenitor humans and were crowned as kings. Adaptation was incredibly rare, but those who achieved it ruled for centuries. The enhanced intelligence granted by the virus allowed them to develop advanced construction techniques, which made the Indipaya kingdom technologically superior to its contemporaries. In fact, their architectural knowledge was passed down to their modern descendants and used to restore ruins around the world. This, along with the developers of Resident Evil 5, linking the virus's origin to the birth of civilization itself, suggests that the Indipaya kingdom may have been the first great human empire in history, and that humanity, unknowingly, was shaped by the Progenitor Virus. During this ancient era, it's very likely that the Progenitor Virus was also responsible, through mutation, for the creation of the parasite later known as Las Plagas. In their attempts to manipulate these life forms, the Indipaya began to create the first living biological weapons. But these creatures, or perhaps other mutants born from the virus, eventually destroyed the underground kingdom. The ruins were sealed off and guarded by the last survivors, along with the Sun Garden and the original flower. Many centuries later, during the Age of Exploration, the naturalist Henry Travis recorded the Indipaya legends about the flower in his book. Although his work was dismissed and ignored by most, a rare copy ended up in the hands of the aristocrat Oswell E. Spencer. Fascinated by its implications, Spencer organized an expedition with Lord Edward Ashford and Dr. James Marcus. In 1966, they found the flower, and with it, the virus. Upon studying it, Marcus understood its true nature. They saw that it didn't just destroy, it created. It could originate life. And with that realization, he named it the Progenitor Virus. That discovery marked the true beginning of Umbrella. The corporation was founded with a dual purpose: to use the virus for both medical and military applications. But there was a problem. The virus had become so lethal that no modern human could survive exposure to it, not even someone like Albert Wesker. And so the T-Virus Project was born, a version thousands of times weaker, designed to be used on test subjects without killing them. Spencer, obsessed with immortality, in his vision of creating a new world ruled by superior beings, launched what would later become known as the Wesker Project. In July 1968, Edward Ashford fell victim to an accident orchestrated by Spencer and died from an infection caused by the Progenitor Virus. Before Umbrella was officially founded, Spencer had already begun conducting secret experiments in his mansion in Arclay. There, he created the first weak variants of the virus, known as Type A and Type B, and used them on plants in the Trevor family. Lisa Trevor was one of the few who showed partial adaptation. She gained immortality, but at the cost of advanced necrosis and irreversible mental collapse. Meanwhile, Marcus conducted his own experiments at the Umbrella Executive Training Facility. There, he discovered that arthropods and annelids were more successful as hosts, especially leeches, which displayed an adaptability similar to that of the flower. With them, he created a new creature, vastly different from a simple leech, carrying a recombined virus that from that point forward would be known as the T-Virus. This new, weaker virus could infect animals, and eventually humans. In 1988, a team from Umbrella's security service infiltrated the laboratory and executed Marcus. Birkin and Wesker accompanied the squad and quickly gathered all the relevant research data for their own projects at the Arclay lab. James Marcus's body, along with discarded specimens such as the Queen Leech, was thrown out. But unbeknownst to the agents involved, the Queen Leech entered his body and fused its DNA with his genome, assimilating his memories by absorbing his neurons. Years later, Alexia Ashford would use the progenitor as the base for the T. veronica virus, while the strain that mutated Lisa Trevor would become the prototype for the G virus. To maintain absolute control over progenitor, Umbrella centralized all of its production in a hidden lab in Africa, right where the Sun Garden was located. Although they eventually succeeded in reproducing it in a laboratory setting, its production was never allowed anywhere else. The T virus became the foundation for most new strains, while the original remained in the shadows. After the destruction of Raccoon City in 1998, Umbrella's darkest secrets were finally exposed. The world learned the truth about the illegal experiments, the biological weapons, and the virus that had turned an entire city into a living hell. 5 years later, in 2003, the company collapsed. But its legacy didn't die with it. Spencer, the last of its founders, made sure at least one secret remained buried: the African lab, the only place in the world where the progenitor virus still existed in its pure form. To protect its location, Spencer ordered the elimination of everyone who knew about it, all but one, a man named Carlos M., who was captured and interrogated by Albert Wesker and the Tricell Corporation. They used the information to locate the Sun Garden and recover the original strain of the virus. With it, they created the Uroboros Virus, as well as other weapons like the liquor beta and the P-30 mind control drug. In 2009, the BSAA, which stands for the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, found the Sun Garden. Since then, its fate remains unknown. But what we do know is that the DNA mutation factor of the progenitor virus still lives on in dozens, if not hundreds of artificial viruses circulating to this day. And it doesn't only do this through derivative strains. The modern progenitor virus has very specific and very dangerous side effects in its hosts. The most common is an abnormally high metabolic rate, which demands massive amounts of energy. This traps the infected in a state of perpetual hunger, which often transforms into cannibalistic behavior. Necrosis is another recurring symptom. Pale skin, darkened veins, exposed tissue, all caused by a body unable to withstand rapid mutation or by a metabolism that begins to devour itself. Aggression is almost universal, fueled by hormonal imbalances, constant hunger, and new dietary requirements. Some subjects experience fever, extreme itching, and abnormal growth due to increased growth hormone levels. This is most visible in arthropods, but also occurs in mammals and reptiles. Claws can develop from bone growth in the fingers, and fertility changes drastically. Arthropods become hyperfertile, while mammals are rendered sterile. Perhaps that's why the Indipaya kings didn't pass down their rule by bloodline. As mentioned earlier, the virus can also affect the brain. Some subjects exhibit enhanced intelligence. Others, by contrast, suffer total mental collapse. The eyes turn red from ruptured blood vessels, sometimes developing reptilian pupils, or even bioluminescence. In the most extreme cases, the heart can grow so large that it protrudes through the chest, and the body's autoimmune response causes severe inflammation that ultimately leads to death. This inflammation is what creates those iconic black veins, seen in so many Resident Evil creatures, since most viruses in the series were ultimately based on the progenitor. But there's another, even more baffling effect. The virus can regenerate dead tissue. Not just heal wounds or diseases like cancer, it can literally rebuild a body from a single cell, something demonstrated in the Cameron virus, which is based on the G virus. Its regenerative potential borders on the supernatural. In theory, someone infected with and adapted to the Progenitor Virus could return from the dead. In the words of Spencer himself, strains derived from this virus could halt aging by preventing telomere shortening. And although very few survive pure progenitor infection, its effects on the body are always extreme. Tissue becomes stronger, muscles, bones, skin, all reaching superhuman levels. Even the muscle fibers of giant organisms, like arthropods, adapt to support their own massive weight without collapse. Skin can grow as tough as armor plating, offering protection from explosives or chemical agents. However, very few modern creatures were created directly with pure progenitor. Instead, weakened strains were used to create more stable bioweapons. But one notable exception is Lisa Trevor. Lisa was infected with one of the earliest attenuated variants, the Type B strain. Though she didn't receive the pure virus, her version was barely modified. The effects were devastating: advanced necrosis, irreversible brain damage, facial deformities, and abnormal growth. Her body stretched, her limbs elongated, and she developed a large ocular mass on her back. But she also gained extraordinary resilience. Lisa became virtually immortal. Her body could resist other viruses, regenerate from extreme injuries, and even adapt to parasites like Nemesis Alpha, which she absorbed, developing tentacles on her back as a result. Lisa also exhibited a tragic behavior. Her fragmented mind led her to confuse women with her mother, whom she believed had had her face stolen. She would kill them and tear off the skin from their faces, which she would then wear, hoping that one day she could reunite with her mother and return it to her. She also did this to hide her own disfigurement, revealing a painful awareness of what she had become. For years, Lisa was subjected to every kind of experiment imaginable. She survived multiple infections, being abandoned by Umbrella after showing no vital signs for 3 days, and even a hail of bullets fired by the STARS team. She even tried to end her own life, throwing herself into a pit after discovering the remains of her mother, but even that wasn't enough to kill her. Eventually, her desperation turned to rage when she saw Wesker inside the Spencer mansion, and remembered he was one of those responsible for all her suffering, and she chased him with unstoppable fury. Despite his new powers, Wesker could barely contain her, finally trapping her under a massive chandelier. There, Lisa was ultimately destroyed in the explosion of the mansion. In the final days of Spencer's life, as his empire crumbled and the mistakes of the past came back to haunt him, his loyal butler Patrick made a desperate decision. He wanted to avoid the inevitable by creating a virus of immortality, and to do this, he used the only resource left to him: the forgotten prisoners locked beneath Spencer Castle. There, he injected the captives with an unknown strain of the Progenitor Virus. Some turned into zombie-like entities, but others mutated into something far worse. They became Blobs. These creatures weren't just grotesque mutants. Their faces were completely disfigured by a massive lamprey-like maw, and they hid beneath a hood that covered their heads. Their backs were swollen with a massive tumor, so heavy it forced them to walk hunched over. And in that grotesque growth shone a single eye, surrounded by acidic pus that they could eject as a weapon, burning everything it touched. Armed with giant rusted anchors, they possessed inhuman strength. Some escaped on their own, while others were freed, directly or indirectly, by Albert Wesker. Despite their twisted bodies and the heavy anchors they drag, the Blobs are shockingly agile. They can leap great distances, and though their eyes seem useless, they have no problem detecting and pursuing prey. The most unsettling fact is that we don't know for sure which virus created them, only that it was a variant of the progenitor. There are several strong theories. They might have been infected with the Type B strain, the same one originally used on Lisa Trevor. And indeed, there are notable similarities. The eyes on their backs, tissue decay, and abnormal growth. It's possible that Spencer was attempting to recreate Lisa, who had come closest to biological immortality. It's also possible that Spencer successfully weakened the pure progenitor, enough to create an entirely new strain, a sort of Type C. Or perhaps he attempted to reintroduce the prototype G virus derived from Lisa, trying to generate similar mutations. After all, when Birkin mutated, he also developed a similar mouth, and G adults were known for the massive ocular growths on their backs. There's even a reference indicating that the G virus was originally meant to grant immortality. But without William Birkin, Spencer was forced to improvise. This aligns with the fact that the Resident Evil 5 DLC Lost in Nightmares is based on discarded content from Resident Evil 3.5, where Spencer was conducting G-virus experiments in his castle. This would mean that the lethargic zombies in that place aren't just corpses, but precursors to the G-zombies. And finally, we can't rule out the possibility that the Blobs were the result of a fusion of multiple viruses, just as happened with Lisa Trevor, a combination of the progenitor, the G virus, and perhaps even something else. But if the Blobs were a failed attempt to replicate Lisa, then the liquor betas were an experiment with a much more focused vision. The original liquors, already deformed by the T virus, were considered an evolutionary dead end. However, their resistance to other infections made them ideal candidates for a new trial using the Progenitor Virus. The result was the liquor beta, an altered, more muscular, and far more aggressive version. Like their predecessors, liquor betas lacked vision, but their other senses became even sharper. Their hearts grew so large they began to protrude from the chest, becoming their main weak point. Their tongues grew longer, their muscles hypertrophied, and their claws developed even further. Interestingly, their teeth were less prominent than those of the original liquors, but more symmetrical. However, the most notable change was something else. Thanks to the progenitor's effects on fertility, liquor betas gained the ability to reproduce with one another, meaning cloning was no longer necessary. Because of this, they began to be sold on the black market as a cheaper, more controllable, and more efficient alternative to traditional liquors. They were even used by rebel forces during the Civil War in the Eastern Slav Republic, where they hunted in packs and were controlled by a dominant plaga parasite. However, among Umbrella's many experiments with the Progenitor Virus, one creature stood out above all the rest. A being that didn't just survive, it evolved into something completely new. It wasn't human and it wasn't a plant, it was leeches. And under the command of Dr. James Marcus, these creatures achieved a level of mutation, coordination, and lethality that even Umbrella hadn't anticipated. Leeches were the first non-plant organisms to demonstrate stable compatibility with their progenitor virus. Not only did they survive the infection, but they adapted to it. And beyond that, they were permanently changed. What Marcus created were not mere parasites, but entirely new organisms. Independent, intelligent beings, with group behavior bordering on a collective consciousness. At first, the mutated leeches succumbed to the progenitor's accelerated metabolism and turned to cannibalism to survive. But over time, something shifted. They developed a social nature never before seen in annelids. They moved in sync, hunted together, and seemed to operate as a single organism. They even mimicked human behaviors, especially those of Marcus himself, who had been feeding them. This level of imitation wasn't accidental. It was a clear sign of advanced intelligence. Their reproductive capacity also multiplied. Like the beta lickers, these leeches were breeding machines, laying hundreds of eggs that hatched within hours, as seen on the Ecliptic Express. Each one grew up to 20 centimeters long, developed sharp teeth on the underside, and a dorsal protrusion resembling an ocular organ. But unlike common leeches, these didn't suck blood. They ripped flesh, and worse, in doing so, they injected a viscous substance containing their viral strain. This fluid, saturated with viral particles, infected the host within seconds, rapidly turning them into a zombie. Their bodies were covered by a transparent, highly permeable cuticle. This skin allowed the virus to pass through, aiding infection, but also made them vulnerable. Sunlight destroyed them, breaking down their cells from the outside. Their chemical sensitivity also made them particularly weak to fire, acids, and toxic gases. The substance they secreted also acted as an adhesive. This, combined with their permeable skin, allowed multiple leeches to join together and form a single creature. And not just that, they could change their external texture and color, adopting the form of a human. This allowed them to hide in plain sight. Thus was born the Mimicry Marcus, a mass of leeches that imitated Dr. Marcus, assembling into a crude humanoid form. It could remain still for hours like a statue, waiting to ambush. When it moved, its form became unstable, but it used its limbs like whips and had a mouth formed on its face for attacking. Though not fully confirmed, it's possible the leeches shared nutrients among themselves, possibly by exchanging fluids. When Mimicry Marcus took too much damage, it would completely fall apart. Its humanoid body would swell, then explode, scattering hundreds of leeches into the environment. But if set on fire, the entire colony would die before reacting. And if exposed to sunlight, the cells would lose cohesion, and the body would slowly dissolve. Curiously, the Mimicry Marcus creatures found in 1998 had never even met the real Marcus. This raises a compelling possibility. Either the leeches inherited genetic memory from generation to generation, or they were instructed by the Queen. Speaking of her, the Queen Leech is one of the most enigmatic experiments in all of Resident Evil. While she was technically created using the T-virus, we must remember that the T-virus originated from Progenitor, so her lineage still traces back to the primordial virus. This queen wasn't just a mutation, she was a hybrid, a chimera between human and leech, comparable to the brain suckers from Resident Evil 3, who had absorbed human DNA and incorporated it into their structure. The queen possessed a unique ability. She could absorb other organisms and their memories. After entering Marcus's corpse, she repaired his cells, fused with him, and little by little became him. His appearance, his voice, his memories, everything. But it wasn't an illusion. She truly believed she was Marcus. Unlike the Mimicry Marcus, she was not a colony of leeches. She was a single, unified creature, more refined, more self-aware. And yes, she could control other leeches, possibly through pheromones, vocalizations, or some kind of superior intelligence. She could also shapeshift, appearing either as a younger Marcus or his older self. This could be due to genetic enhancements, nearly a decade of adaptation, or simply the result of fusing with a natural human body. This creature was hermaphroditic, aligning with her role as a queen. She was also cannibalistic, feeding on other leeches. When she finally shed her disguise, the queen revealed her true form, a humanoid mass of flesh with multiple mouths and tentacles. After being injured in battle by Rebecca Chambers and Billy Cohen, she entered VAC state, a reactive mutation phase triggered by the virus, and transformed. She grew to more than 10 times her original size, lost all human shape, and became an amorphous abomination. Her strength increased as she consumed more leeches, and she gained the ability to spit digestive acid as a weapon. In this form, she was nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. But her Achilles heel remained: sunlight. Exposure to UV rays began to destroy her skin, and in that moment, Billy Cohen took the opportunity to shoot her with a powerful Magnum revolver. With that, the Queen fell and was ultimately incinerated along with the entire treatment facility. Returning to the main timeline, during the final days of Umbrella and the early rise of Tricell as its successor, the attempts to domesticate the Progenitor Virus never stopped. Tricell knew that the Progenitor, in its pure form, was far too lethal to produce viable bioweapons. But they also knew that if they could make it more compatible with the human body, they could create the ultimate virus, Uroboros. In that process, unexpected mutations emerged. One of them was the appearance of zombies with strange behavior, weak creatures that couldn't even stand properly, and adopted a passive hunting tactic. They would remain motionless or lying down, waiting for prey to approach, and then strike. Very similar to the so-called lying zombies, these subjects did not show the severe decomposition typical of T-virus zombies, but they were also far less formidable. Finally, among Tricell's parallel experiments, one of the most sinister was the development of an experimental drug known as P30. The P30 wasn't a virus, it was a chemical compound derived, at least partially, from the Progenitor Virus, possibly through a protein or hormone synthesized by the virus within an adapted host. The purpose of this drug was to create a humanoid bioweapon that was obedient, strong, and completely controllable. P30 granted its users superhuman strength, agility, reflexes, and speed. Although it didn't reach the level of a host fully adapted to the progenitor, its physical enhancements far surpassed those of any normal human. But its most disturbing effect wasn't physical, it was what it did to the mind. The user of P30 lost their will. They didn't lose intelligence nor awareness. They knew what they were doing, but they couldn't stop it. They became extremely susceptible to external commands, retaining lucidity while having their emotions suppressed and their aggression enhanced. In other words, the body obeyed orders, even if the mind screamed against them. And while consciousness could resist at first, higher doses and prolonged exposure eventually shut down all opposition. The major drawback was its short duration. The body metabolized P30 quickly, causing its effects to fade within minutes. Once out of the system, the subject regained their will and lost their enhanced abilities. To solve this, Tricell developed an implantable device placed directly in the chest. The apparatus was anchored to the bone and delivered a constant stream of P30 directly into the bloodstream. The supply could be remotely controlled, keeping the subject in a perpetual state of obedience. However, P30 was ultimately rejected for the Uroboros Project due to its temporary nature. But its development continued in parallel with the Plaga Project as a military mind control tool. One of its test subjects was Jill Valentine. Tricell implanted the P30 dispensing device in her chest, keeping her under control for months. Jill retained consciousness, but was unable to act on her own free will. She was used both as a weapon and a tool, and it was only thanks to Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomar that Jill was finally freed. It is unknown whether prolonged use of P30 caused permanent damage to Jill, whether physically or psychologically. But the experiment proved that P30 didn't cause visible mutations, since it was a chemical substance, not a virus. It didn't grant regeneration or enhance vitality. It is believed to act directly on the body's hormonal balance, affecting the endocrine system and suppressing free will. One of the most intriguing theories suggests that P30 might be based on a master hormone synthesized by progenitor-infected cells. This substance could act on the pituitary gland, triggering increased metabolism, enhanced muscle production, behavioral disinhibition, and suppression of rational judgment. Interestingly, the mental effects of P30 share similarities with the psychological state of the Jabo, the mutated humans infected by the C virus. Both appear to suffer from partial identity loss, combined with forced obedience. This raises a new idea, using P30 not just to control humans, but also to control all bioorganic weapons. But that's an idea we might explore in future videos. For now, we've reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell to stay up to date with my latest uploads. See you in the next one. Hey, don't go just yet. If you enjoyed this video, I've got another one I think you'll love. Check it out.